My first language is actually Cantonese. And so funny enough, it's kind of complicated. Cantonese is not spoken the way it is written in Chinese. And so it was just really, I think, a difficult language. And so when I was younger, I never thought about writing anything. But then we moved to Canada when I was 8 years old, and I learned English, and it was just like, mind blown, this whole new beautiful language. And all of a sudden, I just wanted to write all the things. So in fourth grade, I just was like writing poetry and little short stories and crossword puzzles and like just anything I could write in English. And my mom thought, oh, you're going to be a writer. And so when I was about to enter university, she's like, do a creative writing degree. I'm just like, no, I like science. I'm going to do a science degree. Nobody ever listens to their mom. It's like,
right.
The old joke. Yeah, the old joke is Asian parents always want their kids to be like doctors or scientists or lawyers or whatever. And my mom's like, oh, be a writer. And I'm like, no. What the heck? But then later on in my life, after my degree, after a whole bunch of years passed by, I felt the need to do something creative, and I started writing again. And so shortly before my first kid was born, I started writing Kid Lit because I've always loved children's literature. I mean, I'm one of the few people I knew, among my friends who actually read like picture books all throughout her, teens and 20s and 30s. I just never stopped reading picture books and kids' books. And so it just seemed natural that I would want to start writing that. So I started writing for magazines first. And then I segued to writing books after my kids were grown. So before they were born, I started writing for magazines. And then when they were born, I was just busy raising and homeschooling them. And so I left it for about 10 years. And then after that, when they were grown, I thought, well, I'm going to try books now. So here we are.
Amazing. And you kind of already touched on this. So because you studied science before you kind of pivoted and went back to writing. So is that why the focus on science in your books? Is that just something you've always been interested in? And especially, I love that you tend to focus on women in science.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So science really kind of was, well, I wouldn't say my first love because I did love writing, but I really, really loved science. And so when I went back to writing just to do, something creative, I thought, well, why not marry the two? I've always been, interested in all aspects of science, especially, astronomy and anything nature related. And so, yeah, it just seems very natural to marry the two. And I'm still focusing on science. Most of my upcoming projects are science-based.
Right. And, it's interesting because as I was thinking about it, there is this big push now for more diverse children's books, but it seems like when you talk about children's science books, there still is a real lack of diversity, and your books really help address that. Is that something that you did consciously? Was it just that was what you wanted to write about? Or
you're so right that focus on diverse scientists and people in STEM. And so, this is one way to fill the niche, and we do need more books in that area. And I think the reason why there aren't more books in that area is because, well, what's the saying? History is written by the victors or the conquerors or the colonizers. And so, a lot of the accomplishments of minorities are not in history books and are not taught in schools, or traditionally weren't taught in schools. And so people don't know about them, and it's harder to hear about, these things unless you really look. So I think that's why there is a dearth. Yeah.
Right. And especially, like you said, these are people that have been overlooked, like, I'm going to mispronounce her name, but Shiung, I never learned about her growing up, even though she was so important to the history of science. How did you first run across her, and what really grabbed your attention about her?
Well, I've told other people before, it's been like 10 years since I first, started writing the first draft. And so my memory is a little fuzzy. I can barely remember yesterday. That's the state of my brain these days.
I can remember that.
But I think what it was so my husband used to get paper copies of a journal called Physics Today, and so he would bring them home for me to read. Since then, I've started my own subscription. But anyway, and I think I read about her there, you know, because she was a physicist, a nuclear physicist. And anyway, when I first read about her, like I mentioned before, I was just like, wow, she could have been my role model. You know, a lot of little girls, you know, and boys need to hear about someone who pushed through a lot of obstacles in order to pursue a career in a field that's very male dominated. And, you know, she faced a lot of, you know, sexual discrimination throughout her career. And it was just really important for me, you know, as a woman, as a person of color, same heritage as her, and someone who loves physics, to get her story out. And I was just really lucky that finally a publisher loved it too, an editor loved it too, and they decided to publish it. And yeah, the rest is history.
Was that something that was difficult? Was it hard to find a publisher that also said, yes, this is a great story? I mean, did you feel like you got a lot of pushback that this isn't something that's going to be very marketable or along those lines?
Yeah, so I did. And interestingly, when I first started pitching my story, I was signed by my first agent, who really loved it, and she couldn't sell it. And then I tried to, you know, pitch it on my own to opportunities when, you know, editors were in places. And a lot of the feedback I got was that it's not very kid friendly. You know, physics is hard, and you know, well, it's a great story and very admirable of her and all that. Yeah. And so a lot of the feedback was just like, kids aren't going to, you know, want this or like this or understand this. And yeah, in fact, I got a rejection letter from an editor after the you know, who finally bought my story. After my story was finally sold, I got a rejection letter saying, yeah, this is nice, but you know, it's not kid friendly. Thank you, but no thank you. Like, it's sold already, so there. No, I didn't say that.
And now you can look back, and it has won several awards. The APLA, I don't know, do you say APALA Picture Book Award, among other ones. But I do want to kind of switch gears a little bit, because you have another picture book. I think most of us know you for Queen of Physics, but I also love Two Bicycles in Beijing. It's just such a neat concept, because it's told from the story of the bicycles, right? And you get to see Beijing from their point of view. How did you come up with this, and what made you interested in one ancient city?
So that's a fun one. Thank you for mentioning it. It's like my neglected second child. You know, nobody talks about that one. But it all came about because of a trip. My dad took us, my whole family, so me, my husband, and my kids, to China with him. It was something my dad and my mom really wanted to do, but she passed away. And anyway, my dad ended up taking us, and it was such a wonderful trip. It was in 2013, and my whole family went, and we had a lot of great memories. I took like way too many photos, of course. And so a few years after we came back, I was going through the photos again, because, you know, that's always fun, going through old vacation photos. And when I did that, I saw this like, I was amazed I took it, because I'm a lousy photographer, but this really pretty photo of bicycles lined up outside of a store, and it had all these beautiful, brightly colored flowers around it. And I thought, oh my gosh, all these bicycles in Beijing. And I kind of thought, somebody ought to write something about bicycles
Somebody
in
should
Beijing. And, you know, but that's not really a story, bicycles in Beijing. So I thought, well, you know, what's a theme that kids would like? And I thought about, you know, friendships. And somewhere along the lines too, I thought about friendships kind of lost and found, because I went through, you know, some of that on my own, where I lost touch with friends, and then I found them again after a few years. And so I thought that might be a decent story. So I wrote it out, and that one came about pretty quickly because with Queen of Physics, I did a lot of research and it took many years. But that one, the story came to me quickly. And at first, my second agent who saw it, she's like, I'm not so sure about that. But then after a few weeks, she came back to me and said, I can't get that story out of my mind. So let's go ahead and send it out to editors. And yeah, luckily it found, an editor who also really liked it. And my other thing too is because I had toured through Beijing on my trip, it is just the most beautiful, ancient city. And so I thought, I really wanted kids to see that. And fortunately, they found an illustrator, Junyi who is awesome. I mean, I just love her art, and she did a wonderful, wonderful job of showcasing Beijing. I was really lucky.
So how were they based on your photos? I mean, or did you just say, I want to make sure and include these sites, and she based it on that? How did that work?
Yeah, that's kind of how it worked. When I was writing the story, I, had the bicycles going through the city. And so I took out my map that I had with me when we toured Beijing, and I kind of plotted, the route they would take to hit a lot of the major sites that I thought would be, best to show kids. So then I wrote them in my story, and she pretty much looked them up on her own. So that was great. She did a wonderful job of, what's the word? I lost the word. Anyway,
showcasing. Getting to showcase all these wonderful sites. And like you said, it's such a beautiful way to show kids, to show them around Beijing. It's like your own tour. It's really beautiful. And
thank you.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about the projects you have coming up, which is, I'm not sure which one I'm more excited about. So you have 2 biographical graphic novels, which that's kind of a big switch. The one is on the Dalai Lama, and the other one is on Bruce Lee. I just love both of the subjects. So what made you decide to switch to graphic novels, and how was that process like for you? Was it really challenging going from picture books to graphic novels, or how was that?
It was challenging. It was just like learning a whole new field. A lot of the stuff that I learned for writing picture books, I had to put aside and to write the graphic novels. So they were actually, it was a project that my former agent found online. So everybody who's listening to this, stalk editors and see what their wish lists are, because they tweet a lot of that on Twitter. And so my
those particular subjects, or just saying they wanted more biographical?
My agent, I don't know why she turned to me and asked me that, but my model is like Jane Yolen's model. She was my mentor, is say yes to opportunities. And then worry about it later after you've said yes. So I was like, yes, I want to learn how to write graphic novels.
Sure.
Yeah, of course. So,
had you done a lot of the artwork before? Or do you do the artwork, or do you just do the text? How does that work?
Just the text for this. So they wanted to pair, separate artists with the text. And so I was just the author, but it was still, learning a whole new skill set, because writing graphic novels is like writing film scripts. And so it was just very, very different. I had to learn about, the whole process. And so what I had to do was put together a pitch, which is what you would normally do for, trying to submit graphic novels anyway. So I had a summary, I had a few pages of sample scripts, and I can't remember what else, but that was mostly it. The summary of the scene I want to write about, and, sample script of the scenes. And the editor thought it was great, and she let me pick 2 of the topics. And so the Dalai Lama and Bruce Lee.
I mean, there seem like such different subjects. How did you come up with those?
Well, the Dalai Lama, I'm fascinated just by, the whole Tibetan culture, and also where I live in Bloomington, Indiana, there's also a strong connection to the Dalai Lama. He's come here to visit before, and his older brother came here a long time ago and established both a monastery and the first Tibetan restaurant in the United States here in Bloomington. Yeah, so I was just like, well, I gotta write about the Dalai Lama. And as for Bruce Lee, well, who doesn't love Bruce Lee? My
Sure.
dad has actually met him before. Yeah, so I mean, he didn't know him well, but he's actually met him. And I grew up with, Hong Kong Kung Fu movies and that whole culture. And so I just had to write about Bruce Lee. And it worked out, and I'm excited.
Yes. I can't wait to see them. And I also want to mention you have two other projects, two picture books. There's the Informational Fiction, Clouds in Space, the Nebula story. What does informational fiction mean?
Well, it's like nonfiction, except there is a little bit of made up stuff. So I made up a narrator, which, in pure nonfiction, you wouldn't do that.
Right.
So Nebula is actually the narrator, and but everything else is factual. So, all the constellations and nebulae mentioned. But since I did make up the narrator, and the narrator is speaking directly to the reader, I call it informational fiction.
I love it.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems like that's a great way to get a lot of information across to kids, like a very engaging way. And I do also want to mention your other is Clear and Bright. That's not coming out till 2024, but can you give us a little hint about what that's going to be about?
Sure. Clear and Bright is actually the translation of Qingming, which is a Chinese holiday, pardon me, that's been around for like thousands of years. It's based on ancestor worship, and on Qingming, you go to your ancestors' graves and you tidy them up, and you gather together as the whole big extended family, and you offer them food. You bring food, you offer it to them, but you then eat it, which for me, I mainly remember the food from my childhood in Hong Kong. It's like, oh yay, we get to gather together and eat lots of great food. So I have just like great memories of this holiday, and I just really want to write about it. I noticed that there hadn't been any books about this particular holiday. You think Chinese holiday, and people always talk about New Year or the Moon Festival, and that's been written about ad nauseum to me. It feels like it. Sorry, other writers who wrote about these, but so I just wanted to focus on a holiday that is, really, really important to the Chinese people, and that hasn't been written about a lot. And luckily, Astra young readers also thought it was great, and so it's going to be out 2024. Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm looking forward to this. Maybe we'll have to have you back on when all these books come out. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you.
Well, thank you so much for asking me. Like I said, this is my first ever IG Live, so I'm excited, and this was fun.